I want to take a moment and first of all, welcome each of you to this virtual session of the Florida East Coast Baptist Association. This course is entitled The New Normal for Worship and Music Ministry. And those of you who have joined this session, it's my prayer and my belief that there are those of you that serve in various capacities in music and worship in your church. And so what this session is designed to do is to essentially to give us some strategies, some approaches to how we can continue to be effective and how we can continue to facilitate music and worship ministry on a weekly basis in the local church. Things have changed. Things are not the way that we remember them. And this class is really going to help those of us, again, who serve in worship and music ministry in the local churches to share with one another, to interact with one another, and to come up with some ways that are really going to help us to be better at what it is that we do. I want to welcome each of you. I'm Minister Corey Edwards. I currently serve as the Associate Minister of Music at the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church of Miami Gardens in Fort Lauderdale, where Reverend Arthur Jackson is my pastor. I want to take a moment and thank Pastor Toby Philpart, our moderator, for entrusting this platform to me. And also want to give honor to our state president, Reverend Dr. C.P. Preston, and because it's the right thing to do, all right? Those of you all who have joined us, again, thank you for joining us. I want to introduce to each of you that are on here, those who will be co-facilitating this session with me, and I'll kind of serve as a moderator on tonight. But we have some individuals who serve in worship and music ministry leadership in their local churches. They are all good friends and good brothers of mine. Each of them have music ministries and have participated in music ministries that have been successful and prosperous in the past. And I think that it's a great thing to have each of them joining us on tonight. I'll introduce them to you in just a moment. But I want to say to you, the way that this particular course started was earlier this summer. Our State Congress of Christian Education was in session, and it was the first virtual session that we had. And this essentially is the same course that we presented in our state convention, State Congress earlier this summer. Some of you may have participated in that workshop earlier this summer. I don't know if you did, but if you did participate and you were a part of this course a little earlier this summer, just give me some thumbs up right there on your screen and just give me some indication. Let me know that you were involved in this workshop earlier this summer. Good, I see you, I see you. Not only did we present this course earlier this summer for our State Congress of Christian Education, but then we received a call. Of course, some of you know that I serve as one of the regional vice presidents of our music department of the National Baptist Convention. And so the National Baptist Convention held their first virtual session a couple of months ago. And this class also rolled over into that session. And we were able to take some time and present this same session then. So here we are now on the district level for the Florida East Coast Association. And I want to take some time and present this class just a little bit differently than I did earlier this summer and then I did for the National Baptist Convention. I'm so grateful to have these three wonderful men of God who will be co-facilitating with me. I want to start with the Minister of Music and Worship of the New Mount Olive Baptist Church. Pastor Marcus Davidson serves as the pastor. Good friend of mine, Minister Kenny Smith. Help me just welcome him. Just wave at Kenny, give him a thumbs up. Just say a great good evening to Minister Kenny. Kenny, just wave at us so that the people can see who you are. Also serving alongside me is another good friend of and brother of mine who also is who has what I consider the academy and the anointing. One of the things that we miss a lot of times in especially the African American worship experience, we value the anointing that is on people's life. But I don't think we take as seriously as we should the idea of the academy. And what I mean by the academy is persons who have taken time to prepare themselves and who've taken time to study and who have been trained in the areas of worship and music and church liturgy. And so one of the brothers who has done that, not only since he's been in South Florida, but over the course of his life and ministry career, is joining us tonight, Minister Richard Clements. And you see him sitting there in front of that beautiful, looks like maybe a 3 or 4 manual organ. Yeah, let us see it, man. So we have 3 manuals there and the total praise hymnal. Let's welcome Minister Richard Clements. Everybody just kind of wave at him and give him a great big God bless you. Thank you for joining us, Minister Richard. And also I want to welcome the Minister of Music of the Bethel Church there in West Palm Beach, who also serves as the Minister of Music for our moderator. I had a chance to visit the Bethel Church at the end of last year, no, earlier this year, at the beginning of this year. And when I tell you, this is a model music ministry at our moderator's church. And I find myself even on Sunday mornings now tuning into their broadcast because I'm very, very interested in how many of the local churches are handling the shift and the transition to the virtual church from in-person worship. And let me tell you, this church and this brother, they are one of the churches that I see getting it right. And I'm always so blessed when I tune in. But let's welcome Minister of Music, Brother Ron Pugh, who's joining us tonight. Let's just thank God for him. Ron, just kind of wave at us a little bit. And we're glad to have these 3 brothers on tonight. And with that being said, I want to jump right into this lesson. Now, one of the things that I want to say to you all that I'm having a little bit of trouble with, and Kenny, or maybe one of you guys can help me with this. I'm going to work to try to share my PowerPoint, but it's not coming up in the right right color schemes and the whole nine. It looks a little bit weird. That's the PDF. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in this class. You see this syllabus here, and of course the times and the dates from the convention are still here. But let's talk a little bit about what we'll be covering. The course description. This course is designed to aid and assist the local pastors, ministers, music directors, worship leaders, and musicians in understanding and navigating the inevitability, that word jumps out at me, the inevitability of the new normal for music and worship in the local church. Through this course, church music leadership, those of you all who are part of this class today, will be encouraged and empowered to re-examine and then develop strategies. We don't want to leave this session the same way that we joined it, but I want to make sure that by the time this session is over on these next couple of days, that you have some new ideas and some new strategies and some new ideologies for the short and the long-term future within your own worship context. What does that mean? Every church is not going to be the same. It's great for us to glean ideas and to glean strategies and approaches from one another. But you as an individual at the local church level have to find out what works for you in your context. This will be achieved through lecture, more so class discussion this time around, a couple of reading assignments and some visual display. For this class, you will need a Bible, you will need a notepad. Of course, if you're on this Zoom, you have some level of internet access, and sometimes it helps to have some headphones to keep everything a little bit closer, all right? This course will be presented in 3 lesson formats. Number 1, from the new normal, K-N-E-W, you see that, to the new normal, N-E-W. In other words, we'll talk a little bit about worship and music as we knew it, or the way that it used to be. And then we'll talk about how that transition has been happening to what we consider to be the N-E-W normal. Secondly, in the lesson, Charting Change, we'll challenge each of you to come up with plans and strategies that are going to enable you to go back to your local church context and pretty much set you up for what lesson 3 talks about, which is your virtual viability. Lesson 1, from new normal to new normal, examining music and worship ministry as we knew it. We'll recount what happened during the onset of the pandemic and how we've been navigating our way through it up until this point. So for the most part, that's what I want to get right into. I don't want to waste any time, but I want to start with Brother Ronald Pugh, who is the Minister of Music of our Moderators Church, serves there in the West Palm Beach area. And here it is, we're roughly about 8 months in. I remember vividly, saints, it was the 5th Sunday in March, was the last Sunday that my church met in person. And I've got to say that my pastor was one of the holdouts. My pastor was one of the ones who tried to keep the in-person worship going as long as as long as he could. And in defense of many of our pastors, this is an unprecedented time. The idea of the pandemic has forced us into a situation, honestly, that we've never seen before. And it's not just for the African American church, but literally churches, the church universal, the church global, has had to find ways to deal with this new NEW normal. But before we get to the new normal, I want to talk about the KNEW normal. You all remember how worship used to be. Worship, and just by the very nature of music and worship ministry, demanded that we had many people frequently gathering in close proximity, sometimes multiple times a week. If we think about our choirs, not only did we serve together on Sundays, but there were levels of preparation before we got to Sunday, where we would have rehearsals. We would spend time together in rehearsals. You remember what it was like to walk into a church and just share the love and the joy of Christian love with one another. We'd hug each other with no regard, with no thought. We would kiss one another and we would greet one another. We'd sing around one another. We'd share microphones in worship without any thought or any regard. We would sing in a mic, put it on the stand. The next singer would come right up, pick up the same mic. We weren't sanitizing. We weren't being strategic in how we were facilitating worship and music ministry in our churches, because I really believe that we were facilitating worship and music according to the traditions that had been created in the Christian church over the course of not just years, but literally centuries. Christian worship by design actually started out as congregational. And as we began to add specialized singing to worship, then our choirs began to develop in later periods. And so many of our churches were operating in that same vein. But little did we know, sisters and brothers, that a dangerous time was really coming upon us. And it was something that we had never seen before. And I want to defer to each of these brothers. I want to give each of them about 3 minutes. And I'll start with Brother Ronald Pugh to talk about, number one, we'll go from Brother Ron, we'll go to Brother Richard, and then we'll go to Brother Kenny. But I want to give each of them about 3 minutes to talk to us a little bit about what it was like when you discovered that things were changing. Many of us as worship and music ministry leaders, especially those of us who pay close attention to what we call the liturgical calendar or the Christian calendar, were in the throes of our Holy Week planning. I know that I was. I began Holy Week planning a lot of times right at the beginning of the new year. So right around the second week of January, I began to think about what I want Holy Week to look like in my local church where I serve. Holy Week for me isn't just Easter Sunday, but liturgically speaking, Holy Week begins with me on Palm Sunday, which is the Sunday before Easter. And throughout the week, we consider to be Holy Week. Maundy Thursday celebrates the Last Supper that the Lord had, and Good Friday, many of us have Good Friday services, and of course, Easter Sunday for many of us is the pinnacle of the Christian calendar. It is the apex of what we believe as Christians. And so those of us who serve in these creative spaces in the local church, it's one of the most exciting times of the year to begin to plan our music and our worship around Holy Week. And so here we were, early in the first quarter of the year, beginning to plan music and worship. And then we discovered that this idea of the pandemic was going to derail our plans. And here we are on the 5th Sunday of March. And for myself, literally realizing that things were not the same. And to be honest with you, I didn't have a plan going forward. I didn't know how to facilitate church without us meeting together. But over these last 7-8 months, we've all had to find that out on our own. And we've been sharing ideas and ways to do that. But Brother Ronald Pugh, if you can just chime in for about 3 minutes and tell us what church was like and what were some of the things that happened immediately when you realized that you were going to have to do some things different. What was it like when you realized that for the first time in many of our lifetimes, we would not be in church on Easter Sunday? For me, That was unprecedented. I cannot think of a time in my entire life where I was not engaging in-person worship on Easter Sunday. And so I want Brother Ronald Pugh to chime in a little bit on that. We'll go to Brother Richard Clements, and then we'll go to Minister Kenny Smith to talk to us a little bit about what that time was like and how you begin to handle the transition during that time. Brother Pugh,
I got it. Can you hear me? Okay, hold on. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you, Minister Edwards. Yes, I remember vividly what it was like during that time. For a matter of fact, first of all, I'm sorry. Good evening to everyone, and so good to see so many familiar faces. But to get to the point is, our last Sunday was the third Sunday in March. That was our last Sunday in the sanctuary, actually having service. We were in the middle of preparing for our resurrection service, which entailed the reenactment of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, his resurrection. We actually have a drama team that actually reenact that whole scene. And we, as the choir, were preparing songs. We had multiple rehearsals. We were getting ready to, there were some who had already purchased attire, the whole 9 yards. And there we were, thinking we're in the middle of something great, fantastic, something about to happen. And I get a call from our pastor, from our moderator, and said we need to have a meeting. And when we sat around the table, and he looked at me and he said, after explaining what all was going on and what we were facing, he said, now you do know that right now, the way it looks, we may not have the resurrection service. And when I thought about all of the work and time and effort that was put into that, I'm going like, you got to be kidding me. So, but nevertheless, we had to move forward. Reverend Toby Philpott, sticking close and listening to the CD and reading up on CDC guidelines. Eventually, it was confirmed. No, we set third Sunday was our last Sunday, and it was. I was in denial to a certain degree because I'm thinking, you know what? It's going to pass. It's going to pass. I think by the time this Sunday comes around, it'll be okay. Rude awakening, only to find out that not only would we not be back in the sanctuary by Resurrection Sunday, but as you see, we're still out of the sanctuary even as of this date. But it was traumatic. It was disappointing. It was also like running around with your neck cut off like a chicken, because we actually sitting there trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? Although we had the technology, but having to literally face the fact that you are not going to have service as we normally do, and there will be no congregation in the building, and the fact that I've got to now minimize the number of people that sing, that are in the choir, where we had 30 to 40 people on a given Sunday. Now we're looking at 8 people. So that was challenging, and not only that, we started out minimizing our musician staff. So it was quite an adjustment. But fortunately, we had a good team, those that were there, and we worked through it Sunday by Sunday, trial and error, until we actually, I would say, Minister Edwards, it wasn't until just a month or so ago, we looked at each other and said, we think we got it. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it was, needless to say, it was quite challenging and quite disappointing. But again, we had to realize we got to go with the change and make the best of it.
Thank you, Minister Pugh. And he said something that I think was essential. For a certain period of time, and for many of us still, it was trial and error. And I want that, if nothing else, to be the encouragement for everybody who is on this session tonight, that we are in this together. None of us knew what to do. None of us had a point of reference. None of us knew what to expect. I, like Brother Ronald, was one of the ones who felt like, okay, well, this will pass. Of course, not going to church on Sunday was unprecedented, but we felt like maybe by now, but things would be different, and they weren't. So, Minister Ronald, I want to thank you for sharing your sentiments about what that time was between the new normal, KNEW, and the new normal, the NEW. Minister Richard, take us back to that time. Take us back to the first quarter of this year. Where were you? What was going on with your music ministry? And describe for us what that moment was like when you realized that the idea of this outbreak that graduated into a pandemic started to affect your music and worship ministry. Just tell us a little bit about what that time was like and what the more immediate transition was like. How you found out. Come off of mute, Minister Richard.
Now that would help. Is it better? All right. It's good, to be here and to see my colleagues. What I would say for me personally, I was caught between two worlds, and I was part of the campus ministry at Barry University, and so in that respect, we were connected to a broader system, and so the healthcare entities, the medical departments there at the school were all following the process of this, this pandemic. So there was a lot of information that was coming down the pike. And then I was also observing how the chapel was making preparations to adjust to, to the liturgy as well. So in seeing all of that kind of stuff, of course, I would bring things back to our, to my pastor, Pastor Paris, and we began the process of conversation and then educating ourselves, and then being in conference, and then Pastor was also aware of things as well. So as time went on, I began to feel my feelings, if I could describe it. I felt like Noah, and I had been given the charge of explaining to people who had never seen the phenomenon of rain that this great rain was about to come, and that it was a catastrophe that at hand. So the challenge of moving into our congregation, and then looking at the epidemiology, and not only the impact of this disease process from the perspective of congregational living, but also the devastation that we would experience as a community of color, and how that too was going to impact our congregation. Before I go further, I would like to, to acknowledge and extend, my prayers and my awareness of those of us who have been in ministry, who have lost members of our music departments and of our congregations to this disease as well. That also is a very traumatic experience. When we talk about what this has been like for me, I felt traumatized. I felt like I had been set into a place of acute bereavement and grief. It was as something had been snatched away from me suddenly. And so the shock and the trauma of that, threw everything up in the air. I felt it in my body physically. It literally made me sick. I am in concurrence with, you all with regard to the trauma of not being able to celebrate the seminal or the pinnacle, the liturgy or experience of the Christian tradition. We were robbed of that experience. That whole union of the church universal coming together to proclaim to the world about the hope that we have, even in this time when our hope was being shattered. So I found myself in a place of lamentation. I lamented for our tradition, what I knew, the sound of a big and glorious choir singing only the way Black people can sing, the way we contextualize the singing as a congregation, our hymns, our responses, the fact that, as you pointed out before, the Judeo-Christian tradition is a tactile and sensory experience. So we were challenged in terms of how we would drink together, how we would talk together. What happens when someone is slain in the spirit? You know, how much consolation can we offer to the persons who grieve? We can't bring them to the sanctuary. And at best, we're just a few shades above what I would call a pauper's burial, wherein people are just gone to, taken to a cemetery, and a few words are said, and then that's it. We've had members that have been faithful members of our congregation. Some they did not succumb to COVID, but we had a member who had been a part of our Ministry of Music for 60 years. And we did not have an opportunity to do our music department rituals and to sing over her in the fashion that we felt and our hearts would do. And I can imagine that many of our congregations and our members who have lost loved ones are also feeling that kind of bereavement and that lamentation. I also understand, and I'm coming to terms with the reality that there is, we're not going back to the new KEW. We're not going back. We're not going back. And that is an existential impossibility, as well as a spiritual, a religious, and a liturgical possibility. And so we are giving up a lot of things. And what's happening is that we're now looking at ways, to take what we can from our tradition and then incorporate it into the new. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Minister Richard. And we really appreciate your sentiments. You said something that I'm going to circle back to in just a moment. But I also want now to give Minister Kenny Smith, who serves at the new Mount Olive Church there in Fort Lauderdale. Minister Smith, take us back to that time. What were you doing in the first quarter of the year with your music department? What were you preparing for? And tell us what the moment was like when you discovered. How did you find out that things were about to be different? And what was the immediate transition like? We'll talk more about some of the long-term changes that we made. And I see that he's also logged in. I want Deacon Rod McPhee after Kenny to chime in on this same topic. Take us back. What was going on in your new normal, KNEW? What was the immediate transition like when you found out what was going on? And just kind of share with us a few words, if you can. Minister Kenny.
First, good evening to everybody. I'm honored for the opportunity to be able to share the initial.
Kenny, can you bring up volume? I'm sorry, can you bring up a little bit of volume? You're a little low.
Okay, let me.
I don't know if you can get any louder.
Is that a little better?
That's a little better.
Okay. I think the initial thought was the third Sunday in March was our last Sunday in-person worship, and I believe the conversations with Pastor Davidson and Pastor Kennedy, who's our executive pastor, the initial conversations were that we would be down a few weeks. That was the initial thought. So our planning geared to that, where we would, just have, the hour worship and, just to get through the next 2 weeks. So their sermon prep was more geared towards conversation, in the pulpit. So it was really just us just trying to feel our way through.
Brother Kenny, I can barely hear you. Is that my device or is something going on with you there, sir?
It might be something going on with me. Let me try something else here.
Brother Corey, are you able to hear him okay?
Same thing, brother moderator. Minister King's a little low.
Let me try something else. Hold on here.
While Minister Kenny is working that out, Deacon Rod, can you come off of mute and just talk to us so we can maximize the time? And we'll circle back to Minister Kenny. But take us back to the first quarter of this year, your new normal, things as you do them, and then how you found out that things were getting ready to change, and what was the immediate transition like? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, what happened in our situation, because I do serve as one of our lead servants for the deacon ministry, we were actually in a meeting with the church leaders, whereas the pastor, head of trustees, the heads of the deacons. So in the midst of discussing, how we would handle as far as the church, I had double duty. I'm in here as a lead deacon, but at the same time, I'm thinking twice. You got to have on your deacon hat, but you need to have on your minister of music hat as well, because whatever is going to come out this decision as the leaders of the church, you're going to have effect as far as the music department is concerned. And so therefore, I knew that, whatever decisions that was going to be made. And then I'm rushing through it because I know we have limited time. With Pastor Powell being in the military, he had seen so many things over so many years in other countries. So he was going to err on the side of caution to say, I'm going to prepare for the worst case scenario. And if it's not that bad, then we're going to make sure. So he shut down immediately before any other churches shut down. And so therefore we were going to only run through the prayer line, but, through the prayer line. And so we had to, try to get instituted with the Facebook Live and whatnot. So how am I going to, and my suggestion, Corey, was that, okay, let's meet one last time with the congregation so they won't get it through hearsay, so they can get it officially from us. And he said, we're not coming back together because that one time we come together, we can infect people and they send it back to all of their individual families. So everything you do, you're going to have to do through the phones. And so therefore, that was how we got it. That's how we had to get the ball rolling. We could not come back in the church, period. It was so serious, my brothers. I needed to get to my office and got chewed out by the staff because I needed to get some things out of my office. And they told me, when you walked back in here, even though you had the key, even though you had the code for the security, you could have brought something in this church. So we have to send our people back to this church because you walked to your office and we don't know what you could have brought in. And they had to do everything all over again. So therefore, I knew it was serious, that we could, until we figured this thing out, there would be no meetings. And the way we did with the music ministry, everything had to be through trial and error, to the point where our rehearsals basically was an hour and a half before the actual live taping. And that's how we organized. Service started at 10. We would come together like 8:45. And that's how we got the music ministry to be aware of, this is how we're going to go forward, until I think somebody spoke earlier, one of the gentlemen spoke earlier, I think may have been Brother Pugh, who was saying it was just through trial and error. And each week it got better, it got better, it got better. And that's how, and then we were able to do Zoom conferences, meet with all the choirs to inform them, this is the direction that we're going in the future until further notice. So it was through trial and error of just trying to make it happen. Each week gets better and better.
Thank you. Mr. Kenny?
All right, yeah, I won't be
Much better.
I
Thank you,
won't be
much better.
too much longer. The week before Palm Sunday was actually the week that I understood that we were going to be this way for a while.
Okay.
I just did not expect that it would be October, November, and right now we don't know when we're going back in the sanctuary. So initially, when it came to Holy Week, typically we do something large. We celebrate Monday, Thursday at the church. Last year we had was the first time, I believe, in the history of our church where we had the 7 last words. Corey, you were a part of it last year, and it was a major event. We were trying to do it again this year. Same preachers, contacted everybody, and then to hear, hey man, we're not even coming to do that, not even virtually. So trying to figure out how to be effective caused me to have to learn new things as a minister of music and a choir director, and I can get into it later. But one of the things was the virtual choir situation. Our media personnel at the church, because he was being used by so many churches, he didn't have the time to do the virtual choir. So I then had to figure out how to do it. So I was recording the singers, I was mixing, I turned into the videographer, the audio engineer, the hands-on major producer. And this became every week until we got to a place where we were able to bring in a few singers. And, you know, you mentioned something earlier about people not knowing what to do then. I would make the argument that we still kind of don't know what to do now. And we're still trying to figure our way through. And granted, everybody's context is different. So what may work for me doesn't work for the next minister of music or choir director, but the health and safety of everybody is paramount. So however we do that, that needs to be at the forefront.
Thank you, Minister Kenny. All of these brothers are accomplished in their own right as leaders of music and worship in the local church, and we value all of their input and their opinion. Minister Richard said something during his time speaking that I think has become one of the saddest commentaries of the way that things are different for us now. And that is in reference to the way that we as African Americans facilitate funerals and homegoings of our loved ones and those who serve in our churches and those who are members of our churches. All of us, it's no secret that the African American homegoing experience, or the funeral in the African American church, is a time of great celebration. It's one of the moments where we come together not only as church members, but as friends and family members to celebrate and to commemorate the life of one who's gone on. And as much as we, many of us really hate sitting in long funerals, I can remember the funerals that we go to of our officials, especially when our pastors and our big time leaders pass away. Sometimes those funerals could last 3 to 4 hours on end. But there's one thing about the African American church. We rarely leave a funeral. We will rarely say this is too much or this is too long. We endure it because we recognize that there is a certain finality to what that service gives to us and affords us in relation to the life of the one who's passed. And so most recently, since the outbreak of the pandemic, we have been forced into a situation that robs us of that opportunity to really celebrate others in that way when they make their transition and they pass on. What I was getting ready to say earlier is, as much as we despise long funerals, what I wouldn't give now to be able to celebrate and honor some of the lives that have gone on the way that we used to, and what I consider to be the new KNEW, the new normal. So many people, even those who succumb to the coronavirus, many of them are dying alone. They don't have the opportunity for friends and family members and loved ones to be with them when they pass and to hold their hand. Many times you can't even visit the hospital. You can't even get on the same floor where they are. And the sad commentary, it almost breaks my heart to think about how so many people are dying and are passing away, literally alone in hospital rooms. And then 2020, if you agree with me, has been a year where I used to hear the old saints say, there are folk dying that ain't never died before. Now that doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense, but we know what that means. There are folk that you would never imagine. And if I can, I want to pause, even in this moment, to remember Pastor Michael Johnson of the 6th Avenue Baptist Church of Pensacola, who was actually the dean of the dean and then the president of the state Congress when I was a young man growing up. Michael Johnson was never a fellow who walked around looking sick or infirmed, but he was a strong young man all the time that I knew him, and ended up succumbing We never would have seen that coming. And then to turn around, I want to take a moment and just remember the life of Pastor Abraham Robinson. I can remember getting ready for the state Congress on a Zoom call just like this, and seeing Pastor Abraham Robinson on the Zoom call preparing for the virtual Congress, and not knowing that when I hung up that Zoom call, that would be the last time that I saw Pastor Abraham Robinson alive. I mean, just heart-wrenching. And so with that being said, in the African-American church, we've had to deal with doing things differently in the new normal, NEW normal. Not only have our homegoings and our funeral celebrations changed, but even our Sunday worship order. And let me talk a little bit about this. We have amended worship orders now. I heard somebody talking about the downsizing of the music staff. I'll get to that in a second. But let's talk about the amended worship orders in our churches now. Does anybody remember the time where worship planning included every element that we borrowed from so many liturgical traditions? We would work to incorporate them. I remember the time where before church started, you would come into the church and there was something called a prelude that was going on. You would have a musician on the organ or the piano. And y'all don't remember them days, but those were the days when musicians came to church on time. Let the church say, man, there ain't nobody saying nothing right up in here, but I know I'm talking right. But in order to have what is considered the prelude to worship, meant that musicians didn't walk in after devotional service. It didn't mean that musicians walked in at 11 o'clock, but musicians were at church early enough to begin what we call the prelude. So as worshipers were entering into the holy sanctuary, they were already hearing the sounds of worship coming from music departments. And so we would have the prelude, and in the traditional church after the prelude, there was something called the call to worship. Does anybody remember the call to worship? The call to worship when I was growing up sounded something like this. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all of the earth keep silent before him. Call to worship can be as simple as, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I was glad when they said unto me. Someone would come into the pulpit or to the main rostrum, and they would make an announcement to the church that signified to us that worship was getting ready to begin. And we would bring our hearts and we would bring our minds together on one accord. And we don't see that much anymore, but you would go from the prelude to the call to worship. In the traditional context, there was devotional services. In modern context, there was praise and worship services. And a lot of churches went to a blended context where you would have the idea of the devotional service and the praise and worship service. Look at the prelude. Look at the call to worship. Look at devotion and praise and worship service, okay? All of those included music ministry. I tell people all the time, some of the hardest working people in the church Sunday after Sunday are musicians, because almost every line item of our worship order includes some form of music, whether it's sung, whether it's played. We would go from devotional praise service, there would be altar call prayer. And during the altar call prayer, what would happen? The musicians would play what? Softly. We would play something softly. We would go from altar call prayer, we would have an offering. Y'all don't march around no more, but I remember the time where the ushers would march around the table during offering time. And I like the word Minister Richard used earlier. It was tactile. We participated. There was something that we could put our hands on and be participative in those times when it came to participating in worship. And so not only did we move from altar prayers and offering time that involved music, then we would have special singing from our choirs. After special singing from our choirs, depending on the church that you were in, there might just be another offering. Y'all forget benevolent offering and general offering. Benevolent offering was called the penny offering when I was coming up, but we always had music. And then if the pastor, the preacher, would stand up before he would preach, what would he want to do? Generally, the preacher would want to sing, and so that involved the musicians. And by the time Rev got through his sermon and got ready to close the sermon down good, he would do something that we call tune up. And as Rev would tune up, musicians would then have to get involved. Not like the musicians these days. You had to go and find them. They would go out. But I remember when musicians were a part of the worship experience, how can you partner song with sermon if as a musician you have not been engaged in listening to the sermon? How can you help to partner with the preacher in the preaching moment if you have not been a participant in listening? You know, listening is participation as well, but actively listening to the sermon. And so many times, even after the preacher would finish preaching, then we would do something called open the doors of the church, or invitation to discipleship. What did that involve? That too involved some form of what? Music, some invitational selection. When I was coming up, it was come to Jesus just now. It was just as I am without one plea. It was I surrender all. Musicians in the new KNEW, I'm just talking about what I knew, what I remember. That's right, Brother Brent. Preaching is not time for a bathroom break. Thank you for that. But the way that I remembered it, musicians, you didn't have to practice invitational songs. A good church musician would understand that you needed to have in the Rolodex of your mind a plethora of appropriate musical selections that you could appropriate in that moment. And then even after the opening of the doors of the church, when we got ready to leave, then there would be some type of what we used to consider to be the postlude, music that was joyous, that was jubilant, that now allowed the worshiper to leave the sanctuary with a sense of joy and fulfillment about the worship that they just experienced. And when you look back over all that context, you would see that music was a vital and an integral part of our worship orders. Let me talk a little bit more about some of the other things that we used to do in worship. The choir ushers in the holy. Let the church say amen. There were many times where we would have things like church announcements. Y'all remember the church clerk would come up and read the church announcements, even as the clerk would read announcements, I remember birthdays and welcoming visitors and a lot of things. And let's just kind of be honest about it. We had a lot of things going on in our worship order that really did not point to God. Rather, it was for the sake of people and for the sake of satisfying the ears, the hearts, and the minds of the congregants. But one thing that I think that we have discovered in this new NEW normal is that worship has now become condensed and it's down to the bare minimums. And much of our worship now, I know at my church, there are no birthdays during worship. There's no announcements and welcoming the visit. All that stuff either happens before worship starts or in some type of commercial or promotional advertisement after worship. But during worship now, and in many of our churches, it has been reduced to only that which matters, and that is worship and the word. My church, we sing 2 songs. We offer our praise and our worship to God, and my pastor is up, and he's offering the word. And so much of our worship order has become amended. And there's some good and there's some bad to that. One thing that I think we have lost is the idea of what my friend Minister Eddie Robinson considers to be the congregational voice. We don't hear the voice of the congregation anymore the way that we used to. Does anybody remember something called a responsive reading? Where during the responsive reading, you would have a worship leader to read one verse, and then the congregation would read the next verse, and then you would have that going on. And who remembers what happened during the last verse? It was everybody would read together. That was one of the rare times that we could hear the congregational voice as a whole. So much of our worship now, we're only hearing the voices of those persons who are on the stage, who are leading worship, the singers and the musicians and the preachers. But responsive reading afforded us the opportunity to hear the congregational voice. What about congregational hymns? We've lost those as well. That was another time where we got a chance to hear the voice of the entire congregation. There are some churches that are steeped in tradition. I know churches where the congregation sang better than the choir. Y'all ain't listening to me. I know some churches that the tradition of congregational singing is so rich, it's so storied, it's so wide. And when I say wide, I mean they don't sing the same old 2 or 3 hymns. One of my sad commentaries on the Black church is we have a hymn book with 500 selections in it, 500, 600 selections. And most African American churches are singing about 4 out of 500. Jesus, keep me near the cross. Pass me not, O gentle Savior. What a friend we have in Jesus. And blessed assurance. And because he lives on Easter. And that's just about it in most of our African American churches. And so congregational hymn singing afforded us the opportunity to hear the voice of the congregation. How sad is the idea that we don't have the opportunity to hear the congregation's voice anymore. And so we've extracted much of that stuff out of our worship order to fit the way that worship is. And so we've had to change some things. I want to go back to Minister Kenny. Minister Kenny, can you talk to us a little bit about how your worship has changed in terms of the order? What were you doing before in your new KNEW normal as opposed to the new normal? And this is very specific. How has your worship order changed?
So there were a lot of things that you mentioned that we still do or we're doing as a church. So I'm going to run down our worship flow. We have 3 services on Sunday, and our 7:15 and 11 o'clock services pretty much mirror each other. The 9 o'clock service is 45 minutes. You come in, call to worship, praise and worship, pastor's up preaching, the members giving their offering on the way out, and that's it. 7:50, well, let me give you 11 o'clock because that's more extensive. So 11 o'clock, deacons start off with devotion. After devotion, there's praise and worship. After praise and worship, there's responsive reading. After responsive reading, there's a morning hymn. After the morning hymn, there's the welcome from the hospitality ministry. After the welcome, there's fellowship period. After the fellowship period, we're going into the offering. As the offering is going on, the music ministry then provides worship and then the song or hymn of preparation, pastor's up preaching, altar call, benediction. Now, we have a opening, we have a song, Pastor Davidson or Pastor Kennedy preaches, and there's an outro, and we're out. That is our worship. So we've gone from an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, almost 2 hours worth of worship to now literally 45 minutes. Will we be able to get back to that hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours worth of worship? I highly doubt it. And I doubt it because the people now are understanding probably a good majority of the stuff. It's not bad. But then you have to also consider what is actually worshipful or what is actually, I don't want to say showmanship in a sense, but some things you can be doing just out of tradition and not necessarily what is actually worshipful for the congregation. I just saw my executive pastor jump on the call as well. So that's where we are.
Yeah, when you talk about the idea of determining within your local worship context what is really worship, and when we look at the idea of worship, it's an Old English compound word in a sense. Worth, W-O-R-T-H, and then the suffix ship, S-H-I-P, which means the state of. So when we say worship, what is the state in the word worth? Value. What something is worth to you, you're determining its value.
Sure.
So when we say worship, what is the state of God's value to you? And the things that we do in what we consider to be worship ought to help us to affirm God's value to us. So when we look at a lot of the stuff that we were doing in the new normal, the KNEW normal, how much of that was really pointing us to affirming God's value in our life?
Yes,
We love to welcome visitors. We love fellowship time. We shaking hands and hugging necks. And I believe in the idea of showing forth Christian love one to another. But that was one of the elements of our worship context. I'm not sure that it really fit into the idea of necessity when you're talking about affirming God's word or affirming God's value to us. I went to a church one time where they would sing happy birthdays. Now, listen, let me say this to you. I think it's great to celebrate birthdays. I think it's great to honor people. But guess what? I really am not particular about sitting through a lot of extra elements in church that don't point me to God. You know why? Because too much of what is man-made and what is self-aggrandizement takes our attention away from God. And so when we do birthdays and worship, when we interrupt worship with birthdays, and I know we like to welcome visitors and even some of these church announcements. Listen, make the announcements before worship starts. Make the announcements after worship starts. But interrupting the flow of worship with a lot of stuff, we've discovered now that stuff is not really necessary, or we find other ways to communicate to our congregations, those types of things. Deacon Rod McPhee, how has your worship order specifically changed it from the new KNEW normal to the new normal? And I like what Minister Kenny did. I like what Minister Kenny did. Minister Kenny actually gave us the timestamp. So he's saying that the worship went from 1:45, 2 hours, now to a 45-minute service. And people like me, I give God praise. Y'all ain't saying nothing right up in here. I give God glory. I give God honor that we are not engaged in worship for 2 and 3 hours the way that we used to be. But there's, I see Pauline Scott patting her hands and saying, thank God. Y'all remember the days where church would start at 11 and we didn't leave till 2. Amen. But Deacon Rod McPhee from the new Shiloh Church, Pastor Dale Powell, talk to us a little bit more specifically about how your worship order has changed or how it has been amended in this time.
Somebody,
and if you're not speaking, I'm gonna ask you to go on mute so that we can hear the speaker clearly. Go ahead, Deacon.
All right, good evening once again. What we had to do, we had to take a combination of our early morning service and our 11 o'clock service for the sake of time. Something Reverend Jackson said years ago one time, he said, sometimes you don't need to get rid of everything. He said, but sometimes you have to cut the fat off the meat. And so we had to look at what was going to be effective, but at the same time, we had to look at time. We couldn't yield the way to time and not be effective in ministry, because if there was a time where we needed to be effective, it needed to be right now. So therefore, it's all, everything what we did, everything is always timed around giving the man of God or the woman of God enough time to make sure that they can be effective coming to the parishioners. Everything else, Brother Corey, we pretty much, we did with trial and error. When we first started out, it was our only way of notifying our members of what was going on. So we opened up with the song one time, and then we came in with exhortations and whatnot, and we realized, and I think you all stated it earlier, we were doing certain things that really was not helping the service, but it was because of traditions. This is what it's supposed to do. This is what they need, and we just had to say, hey, we're timing things, and we're into a great worship service, and it's been cut by just 10 minutes of announcements, trying to get announcements to everyone. So we had to go back in and we had to look at what's effective at the same time, what was, how we can get, some good time on it. So we changed the service from all the long announcements and whatnot to where now we just start, you know, at 10 o'clock when the service starts, I give a countdown for the live to start from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and our music starts right then. It is a very quick prelude into the worship service. Someone comes in, give us, you know, a prayer. From the prayer, we have our music ministry to minister through song. Pastor comes up, he does the offertory appeal. We play some music to give those who are online an opportunity to go ahead and give online. From there, there's a selection, there's the sermon. From the sermon, invitation to discipleship. After that, as you stated earlier, we always close out with singing, with songs of praises. Our biggest challenge was, this was our biggest format of getting the information to our members, but we had to cut the announcements down literally all the way to out. And we took a little out of the early morning service, a little out of the 11 o'clock service, and we combined it to, you know, into one. And then those things that were not effective, we had to eliminate it. But there's still one element of our service that we need to cut down on. And because we family, I'm gonna keep it in-house because right now, as you stated tonight, there's just some things that we do traditionally that's really not effective in this new setting.
In this new normal. Thank you, Deacon McPhee. Brother Brother Pugh, what has changed at the Bethel Church in relation to how you all were facilitating, or here's a new word I'll start using, Minister Richard, curating worship? We don't recognize that we are curators of worship. We are the shapers and we are the designers of worship, according to how our pastors lead us. But what has changed more specifically in your order of worship in relation to some of the things that you were doing before as it relates to what you're doing now? And then what is the time frame, the change of time frame? What does that look like for you guys at Bethel? New Bethel, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes, sir. You hit the nail on the head there, Minister Edwards, when you talked about the new in KNEW normal. We could easily be in service from at least from 2 hours to two and a half hours. However, under the new NEW normal, we have reduced from that to on an average of an hour and 15 minutes, to be honest. We open up, all of our announcements are displayed at the very beginning, but once call to worship takes place, we go from call to worship, we have praise and worship, and then the word. And that's what we focus on. And what I'm so glad about and elated about this new normal is that what we are doing is so, I feel, in our setting, so much more valuable because everything we're doing is pointing to God.
That's right. Talk.
And that's what's important. A lot of things that we have done was man desired. You know, it was something that we wanted to do. It really wasn't anything that was necessary or valuable to worship. So all that being said, our pastor has said, he's so intrigued by this new normal. He said, when we go back into the sanctuary, he said, if and when we go back into the sanctuary, he wants to keep the same format. Not going back to the traditional of being in church for 2 hours or 2.5 hours, because we find that it's so much more fulfilling. I do. At the same time, I must say, as you began to reminisce of how it used to be, I miss the congregational voice. I do miss that. I miss the congregational voice. But I would not trade it. Be honest with you, I would not trade what we're doing now to go back to the KNEW normal, staying in service for 2.5 hours. That's me.
Yeah. I'm with you, Minister Ronald Pugh. And as any good Baptist preacher knows how to alliterate, yes, I miss the congregational voice, but I don't want the coronavirus. Y'all ain't saying nothing. I just said something.
You don't want to hear that.
All right. Minister Richard, how has worship changed specifically in relation to the order of worship and the time frame that you're spending? And here's something that has arisen as I've listened to the last two presenters. How did you determine what was essential going forward in relation to what you were doing before? How did you curate that? How did you decide what to keep and what you would do different? Go ahead.
Minister, I want to answer quickly that my solution to curation was given to me by the pastor that ordained me, Reverend Cofield at Emmanuel Baptist Church in New Haven, Connecticut. And he said to me very bluntly, Richard, there are certain things that can only be cured by prayer or rigor mortis.
They got to die.
They got to
die off.
And I think one of the things in our instance that died off as a result of this pandemic has been our structure of worship. And also the significance of when we moved into this church, our configuration is different. So even the space has had an impact on how we order things. The call time for musicians and the choir was 30 minutes prior to worship. Prayer was 15 minutes before worship. And at the old sanctuary, and actually here as well, we had a prelude. And the prelude was the time that the choir came in. There was a call to worship, then there was spoken, and then we did the Gloria Patri. And from the Gloria Patri, which is chant, we went into the chant of the Lord's Prayer. After that, there was an interlude, and then we went into, I think it was the offertory, which was the deacon's prayer. And our old worship was like a flight with a layover. And you know, if you've ever been flown somewhere and you had to lay over for a period of time, that was what happened around this particular time, because during the time of the offertory, the choir offered a selection, but that was also the time when the pastor would come in while we were singing. The ministers and everything would be fellowshipping in the pulpit while we were singing. And then eventually we would sing long enough for them to sit down and then continue to minister. And then from that, we went into the welcome of visitors. We sang happy birthday. And then after that, we had moments in Black history, which could go anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour in terms of a presentation. After that, there was a second offertory, and we sang, and so the second choral selection was integrated into the offertory, and we would sing past the offertory as well. And then for years, because our former pastor had a stated selection. It was a hymn that we sang every Sunday prior to his preaching, which was Amazing Grace. And now it's the selection. After the sermon, we did an invitation to discipleship. There was an altar call, and after the altar call, there was the benediction, and then it was followed by a choral, a response to the benediction. Our Reformed worship now, that ran for about anywhere from a half an hour and a half to 2 hours, to do that. Our Reformed worship entails a call to worship, and then we go right from there into the scripture, and from the scripture into an invocation. There is a selection. There are announcements. We still acknowledge birthdays and wedding anniversaries virtually. And then we move from that to a prayer for the offertory. There is a selection, and when I say offertory, of course, people are either doing they're making the virtual donations and things like that. There's a selection. I sing, or a guest person will sing. Then there is the sermon, and then after the sermon, there is a virtual invitation or call to discipleship that goes in tandem with a closing prayer and the benediction and a choral response.
Okay.
And so
thank you for that.
The time for that is it has been 45 to 55 minutes. We average getting out 55 minutes.
So we can see in all of these instances, this has forced us into, I like what Minister Richard called it, a reformed worship order or an amended worship order, which is one of the good things that I think has come out of this pandemic, because it's forced us to get down to the main things, that which is essential and necessary in order that we are facilitating worship for our congregation and our members. Very quickly, I know the time is winding down. I want to just take a moment and I want to say a great big thank you and a God bless you for all of the pastors that I see logged on. I saw Pastor Shellman. Thank you. Wave at us, Pastor Shellman. Man, we're honored. Thank you so much for joining us. I think I saw the moderator who was on. I see our past women president, Sister Williams, and others. I don't want to take up too much time, but all Pastor Wells, thank you. I see you there. Pastor Oliver Wells and so many others. If I'm missing some, y'all forgive me. I'm just scrolling really fast, but I just want to take a moment and just acknowledge the presence of all of our pastors who are joining us on the call tonight. One of the things that I've discovered personally in this new normal is that we have to find a way now to think outside of the box in order to do two things. Number one, to have interaction with one another. You all mentioned the idea of the fellowship time, shaking hands, hugging, singing together, fellowship time. We don't have the opportunity for our congregations to interact with one another anymore. So the new challenge is figuring out a way that our congregations can still interact with one another, and secondly, to lead them into engagement with God. What do I mean? It's one thing when we are all corporately worshiping in the same room together without distractions. As worship leaders, I think the job then was a little easier. It's never an easy thing to do, don't get me wrong. But I think it was more manageable to be able to work to bring people into the place and the space of worship. The challenge now with getting members to engage with God is rough. You know why? When they wake up on Sunday morning, and here's the graphic. I'll try to find the graphic that I showed the last time. But one of the things that's harder now than it used to be, and I don't know if y'all can see this. Y'all see this? How my pastor thinks I watch the live stream. They would really like to, pastors, I know y'all would like to believe that the saints are home with their family gathered on the couch, looking at you and singing and praising God. But the reality is that the young man at the bottom, we're waking up on Sunday mornings, and because we are watching on our devices, watching virtually and cyber, what ends up happening is it's harder to get people to engage with God when they are in a position like that. And so hence that becomes the challenge, to get people to interact with one another and getting them to engage with God. I want to ask my fellow colleagues, the same group of panel speakers tonight, what have you done to continue to engage or interact with the members that you don't see on a weekly basis anymore? In other words, it was one thing when we would expect to see choir members on a weekly basis because we knew we had rehearsal on Thursday, we'd see them on Sunday. But for those choir members that didn't make the cut, what do I mean didn't make the cut? We've had to reduce the number of singers and musicians, all right? And so our choirs have gone from 40, 50, and 60 choir members to a worship team of 3 and 5 and 6. But I want to talk specifically about those folk that we have not seen for the last 8 months. Because we talked about the idea of reopening. And when we come back, I'm a firm believer, we don't know when we're coming back. And number two, when we come back, we don't know what it's going to be like. To be honest, we don't know if people are going to come back. I know we'd like to believe that we do. But the truth is, we don't even know if people will come back to church the way that they used to. You know, I pray so much for my church and for my pastor. You know, we're building a church in North Miami to seat 3,000 people. And I go in there once a week and I look around. And as I'm looking around, I'm thinking to myself, Lord, will there ever be 3,000 people in this building? And so with that being said, I'm a firm believer that people coming back, and whether or not people make the decision to come back, And what they will come back to is going to be predicated on how we're managing them now. Will we have a choir to come back to? Will a choir ever come back? Sister Angela Williams says some people are just not going to come back to the sanctuary. And for those that wish and desire to come back to the sanctuary, I believe much of it is going to be predicated on how we're managing them now. I want to start with Minister Ronald Pugh. Then I want to go to Deacon Rob McPhee. I'm going to just start, only you two, I want you to answer this question. But how are you managing the people that you have not seen in 8 months? How are you interacting with them? How are you managing them? And Sister Justin says, thank God for our section leaders who are calling people. I think that's great. But I think we have to now move from a place of what we call high touch. I said this in the last lesson, to high tech. What is high touch? It's easy for me to touch you and grab your hand, hug you and kiss you, but we don't have high touch anymore. So how do we use high tech technology to engage and interact with our people and help them to engage with God? Deacon McPhee and then Ronald Pugh, I want you two to answer that question. Take about a minute, 60 seconds, and give us some of the ways and the ideas that you are managing the people that you have not seen in 6 to 8 months. Deacon McPhee and then Ronald Pugh.
What we're doing, we're still trying to meet with in the sense of fellowship. I think at the beginning of this session, you spoke on those our members who've been a part of our ministries and their loved ones have passed on, or we've had choir members that passed on and we couldn't celebrate with them. And so once that did happen to us, we got our events committee together, and once a month we have our different sections. They have their Zoom meetings. Sopranos have 1 week, altos, tenors. I make sure that I'm involved with each meeting, and then every other month we have game night. We fellowship. If there's a person, we do roll call. If there's a person that's not on that night with our game night, I make sure that I personally call those individuals, because I let them know that we must stay in contact with one another. We want to know what's going on with your family. One of our members right now is going to bury her mother next week. And so we're now aware of that. We're able to reach out to her. Another sister gave a testimony about her son being sick and he's, away in college. Our members who've had children in college and those situations that happen to them, they're able to reach out to that sister. So now we have it to the point where there is absolutely nothing that happens within that choir that someone does not make a report, at least on a monthly basis. Every month, our sopranos have a night together, our altos have a night together, our tenors have a night together. Yesterday, I sat and I called every member of the male chorus to make sure that we were in communication and we were in touch with one another. We have a senior choir. I got with that choir director and I told her, I want to sit with you and we're going to call each and every member, because our senior choir told us, Brother Corey Patrick, no, we don't do the Zoom thing. We don't do all electronics. So we call our senior choir members, one by one, just to make sure everybody's together. And the last one is our youth department. I rely on our brother Desmond Washington in the youth department to make sure that all of our kids in our youth choir, that we communicate with them and their parents on a month-to-month basis. So I'm very involved, hands-on with making sure that we touch base with all our members, because like you said, if they go through these things where their mothers pass and their loved one pass, and we have never reached out and talked to them since we locked the doors of the sanctuary, when it's time to come back, they're gonna know that we just sing about love, but we're not living about love. So God bless you, and that's how we're handling our new norm in this, during this pandemic.
Thank you. Ronald Pugh, how are you all handling the folk that you hadn't seen in 7 to 8 months? How are you keeping them engaged? Ronald Pugh, come off of mute.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Minister
60
Edwards.
seconds, because I got to wrap it up. 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Okay, we have very quickly, we have, and she's online now, our devotional leader that's part of our music ministry who sends out weekly scripture readings, devotionals that goes out to our section leaders to then disperse to all of our choir members, those that are in the music ministry. That's for encouragement. Just recently, we had a prayer vigil because of the challenges that so many of our members in the music ministry face. We actually had a prayer vigil where everybody was assigned a certain time and day throughout the week to pray, and we did it corporately. That was a way of encouraging one another, praying for one another, and also staying in communication with each other. We just recently, it wasn't designated just for music ministry, but we just recently had a drive-by, and our pastor was celebrating his birthday, and oh man, what a fellowship! Cars were coming by. It was everything was safe. Everybody had on masks and what have you. But just the idea of seeing everyone again, and I got to see choir members that I hadn't seen in the physical, I had not seen other than on Zoom, for our Bible study and so forth. So making it real short, those are some things, and those are and we are trying to plan a social via Zoom with our choir members so that we'll get a chance to fellowship, see each other, and that sort of thing. But on a short note, that's pretty much what we've been doing and what we've done.
I want to say to you all that this has been a good discussion on tonight. Has this been helpful to anybody? Just wave at me, give me a thumbs up if this has been helpful. This has been a blessing to you. All right. What I'm going to do tomorrow night, I want you all to meet me back on tomorrow night, and I want you to invite every person that you can think of for whom this information is pertinent, because we're going to dig a little deeper on tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, I want to talk about the idea of charting change. How do you now start to make plans? Now that we're starting to kind of get adjusted to the new normal, how do you begin to make plans to chart the change that you need going forward? Tomorrow, I also want to talk about trusting the science. How much are we trusting the science? Are we even paying attention to the science of singing? You do know that when we talk about the World Health Organization, when we talk about the CDC and other entities that are designed to give us sound and accurate information on how this coronavirus is affecting us, did you not know that they have labeled people who sing as super spreaders? Not spreaders, super spreaders. And let me say this, these are folk that don't sing like us. Just take a moment and hear what I'm saying to you. They say when you sing like this, what a friend we have in Jesus. Oh, our sins and griefs. That's fine if you sing like that in your church. They consider people who do that to be super spreaders. So what kind of category does that put us in when we say, what a friend we, and our preachers and our pastors who are preaching and we're singing and we think about the aerosol and the proximity. Y'all know at the last time I taught this class, and I'm gonna talk about this tomorrow night, there's gotta be 4 things. The priority has to be safety. Just like a good, and you preachers who are on here, y'all can write this down, and if you use it, just send me a little offering, all right? But the priority is safety. The position is separated. We never heard this word social distancing before a few months ago. But in our churches, the priority has to be safety. The position has to be separation. The place, watch this, has to be sanitized. Before we are letting people into our sanctuaries, and those of us who already have people in our sanctuaries, what are the procedures and the protocols for ensuring that the worship space is sanitized? So the priority is safety. Don't be guided by anything else. I know some folk who, man, we need the folk to get back to church because you're worried about financial things. That ought not be the guiding factor. The priority ought to be safety. The position is separation. The place should be sanitized. And lastly, the plan needs to be solid. Join me on tomorrow night as we dig into some more of that. Trusting the science, talking a little bit about charting the change forward. And lastly, you need to be here for this part, virtual viability, because it's not going anywhere. I saw Sister Williams and some other people that were talking about the idea and I think Brother Pugh said it as well. We're going to have to find a way now going forward. The virtual church isn't going anywhere. And for those of y'all who are waiting to return back to the way things used to be, you're thinking with an old world traditional mentality. You are going to have to start now. What does investing in the equipment look like? Planning for investing, budgeting. You might be on the iPad now, but in 2021, is your church still going to be on the iPad? Are you going to be virtually viable? We're not saying run out and buy $10,000 worth of equipment, but I think it's a wise thing to do now to start talking about the investments that need to be made going forward toward the future. Because if we ever do go back to in-person worship, it does not mean the cancellation of virtual worship, but we now have got to find a way that they can coexist together. I like that, Kenny. The new normal needs intentional engagement. We have to. So we're going to talk about all of that. And if you're not virtually viable, I hate to say this, but you may end up losing out, because in this day and age, we are all fighting for our space in this virtual society. And if you are not virtually viable, when folk scroll past your church or scroll past your broadcast, the sound is not clear, they can't hear, the lighting is bad, the camera angle is bad. Honey, it's just a swipe of the thumb and I'm on to the next church. I'm on to the next broadcast. How virtually viable are you? What plans and preparations are you making so that your virtual church can coexist? You got to do some things different. Pastors, maybe your church Wi-Fi bill each month was $49. That's good. But now you may need to upgrade. You might need the $129 Wi-Fi now. You have to think about those things. So on tomorrow night, please join us back. I saw moderator Phil Park stepped out, but we have to get out of here. Let me also say this to everybody who's on here today. I took this time out. Today is actually my birthday. Let the church say, praise the Lord. I'm 44, like Obama, 44. And this
Happy birthday.
Goes to show you, thank you. This goes to show you how much this matters to me, that we are informing, equipping, and helping our churches with what they need to know with these experts in music ministry so that we can be better at what it is that we do. So thank you again to our panelists. Y'all help me thank our panelists, Dave, and thank God for them. Minister Richard Clements, to Minister Kenny Smith, to Deacon Rob McPhee, and also to Brother Ron Pugh. Thank y'all so much. For those of y'all
Brother
who
Corey,
don't leave yet. Huh?
I'm still with you, my brother. I'm going. Yes, sir. But I want to yield to our first vice moderator. I apologize. I've been going in and out in the car. Dr. Shellman, if you would just give some observational closing notes, and I'll be back with you guys again tomorrow, Corey.
Thank you, brother moderator.
Thank you so very much, brother moderator. And once again, happy birthday to you, which I did send it to you earlier. And wonderful workshop, and so many good points, and we're working on those things, and we need to continue to work on all of those things. So continue to do the great work that you're doing, and don't be surprised if I call upon you directly otherwise for some other things as well. So continue to keep up the good work, and keep us abreast of those things that we need to know, and as we prepare ourselves to go into the next phase. And I trust that everybody certainly has enjoyed this evening, and we'll certainly be looking forward to it tomorrow evening.
Thank you, Pastor Shellman. While you're there, lead us in a word of prayer, and I'm inviting everyone. We should be heading where now? To the main stage. All right. And is that right, Sister Williams? Thank you, Sister Angela. But please, Pastor Shellman, you'll close us in prayer. And I'm looking for, hey, there's my girl. Hey, Keisha, look at you, sweetheart. Oh my God. Look at God. Hey, beautiful girl. So happy to see you tonight. But join me back on tomorrow night. This discussion is going a lot deeper. Pastor Shellman, we yield to you.
Gracious and eternal God, our Father, we thank you for this blessed time of sharing. We pray that this information will soak into our hearts and our minds, and that we will grab a hold of those things that will allow us to be able to always bring honor and glory to your name, and to understand that this is not about us, but it is all about you. Bless and keep our facilitators, that they will continue to do the work that you have assigned to their hands. Bless us as only you can until we shall meet again. Yes, our prayer, and it is in the blessed and the matchless name of Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Amen.